Hi, and welcome back to another edition of Inside Great Lakes Sailing. We are so fortunate to have one of the best journalists and photojournalists in the sport of sail racing. And we're talking to him on Thursday at 1 o'clock, all the way down in Auckland. And obviously, we're here in Detroit. And I just wanted to thank you for taking the time. It's Richard Gladwell, who is the New Zealand editor for Sailwear magazine. And he's been involved a lot lately in the America's Cup promotion and information and all that's gone on. And so, first of all, thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah,
And
great. Good to be here.
we're going to kind of talk a little bit about the America's Cup and some of the things surrounding it. Now,
Um,
as a reporter, as a photographer, as a videographer, you've spent most of your time obviously covering America's Cup, the Whitbread race, the Volvo around the world. And how did you transfer from how did you get involved in that?
well, I started when I was a kid. I mean, I was always, um, for some reason, got the job of class publicity reporter. So we had a magazine then, Sea Spray, which carried club and class notes in the back of it each month. So I just used to write a column for that. When there was a major regatta on, I'd do a report on that, and it just I just kept on going. And then when I went to the Admiral's Cup, Gibbsy sort of said, "Oh, you've got to, write a report on this and start building it up." So I covered that event, and then when I got back, the guys just said, "Well, I was working for Boating New Zealand at that stage as a freelancer." They just said, "Why don't you keep going?" So I did, and I started writing a, commentary column each month, and what I thought was right and wrong with the sport, and it just built out from there.
Okay. Well, let's kind of switch gears a little bit. In the last, I don't know, 2 weeks, lots has happened with the America's Cup. Obviously, Ben and the boys and Grant, everybody got together. You were part of that process. And is it good? Are you happy with what things are? And we can talk about the deed and all the things that go around it. But at least they're signed for 2027. Do you feel comfortable with everything that's been done so far?
No, not really. The issue is that, I mean, all they've done is they've issued a protocol, and when you read those things, you always read them twice. First time just to see what's there, and then the second time to see what isn't in there, and then whether they can really do what they say they're going to do. So in the protocol, I mean, it's pretty much a rollover of what they had, last time round. A lot of the language is the same. The concepts there are the same. There's, the big change is touted to be this America's Cup partnership, which, certainly a good idea and great if they can get it implemented. But as soon as you go in behind that and say, well, how are you going to do this? The sort of people starting to look sideways at each other, and we will see. So there's a lot of back talk going on between the teams and all this sort of thing. We know from what's gone on, for the past 10 months that there hasn't been a lot of agreement. I know when I went away to the Admiral's Cup and sort of did a tour through Europe as well in mid-June, and came back at the end of July, they were still saying the same thing. Oh, we're making slow progress, but no one was talking about it. Overseas, asked the English media what they were seeing, and they were saying, "Oh, we don't know. We're just reading what you write." So the whole thing sort of really goes nowhere. And the beginning even of the week that they signed off, I mean, I think there was definitely a strong case there being no agreement and a deed of gift match. And suddenly on the Wednesday, it all sort of changed, and Ainsley was on a plane and he was out here doing media conferences on the Friday. So that tells me that the whole thing came together very quickly. When you go through there and look at, what can they do within the deed of gift, and we all know, once you start reading up on that and looking what's happened previously to amendments in the deed of gift, I mean, they're all the things that obviously have to happen to meet the what the intent of the donor was or what he actually said in the four square corners of the deed. But this is way outside that. And, I just can't see how they can amend the deed of gift to make it happen. So when you then start going through a parallel exercise to say, well, how does this happen? You can come to certain conclusions as to how you could do it. But these guys aren't coming out and saying that. And when asked if they're going to change the deed of gift, they say, well, yeah, we probably are, but then wouldn't say where. And, when you talk to people about it, I mean, they've, my reading of the deed of gift and knowing what's gone on in 88 and 2010, and what the arguments are, um, they can achieve a lot of what they want to do by another method, but they haven't said what that method is. And I mean, I've written about what I think it could be. Um, the only thing they definitely can't change under either system is this concept of the defender having the right to choose the venue.
Let me ask a loaded question. Why is it so hard for yachtsmen to sit down and hammer out a simple agreement? Because if you read 800 pages of what's written, there's so many outs and exclusions and opportunities to walk away from it. It's nuts. And
Well,
this is a long-term problem. This is not something that happened yesterday. Go all the way back. Even we have a mutual friend in Tom Eman. Tom was part of that whole legal case that went back, a number of years ago. It just they can't seem to. Is it ego? Is it just what's your take on that sort of acrimony between organizations?
well, to some extent, it's a pissing match between billionaires, and that's part of it. The other part of it, though, is that the America's Cup um, is always, even when New York operated it, I mean, it always operated outside the rest of the sport, and they always think that what works in the sport we don't need to do in the cup. We've got to find this way that's absolutely unique, and you got lawyers involved and everything else, and it just sort of builds on from there. And if they just looked at it like a normal yacht race, how do you run this thing? You create an America's Cup class, you have that run in a normal class association, you run it on a democracy basis. There's what everyone knows and understands of, how class administration works. And the problem is, and those, I mean, I used to be an international judge and umpire and got trained and all that. And you understand how the structure of the whole sport is hung together. These guys bring in lawyers from a, Fat Five law firm, and they don't understand, they don't want to know, they don't want to look at any of the tradition or history or what has worked in the past. They've got to come in and do a whole new way. And of course, then you get these documents that are running out to 60, 90 pages long, and then they've got an appendix on that, which is, another deal entirely. And now we've got this term sheet attached to it. And now we've also got a, partnership. So, I mean, no wonder you're getting some blank looks out of the guys that are running the show when you start asking questions about the detail.
All right, so let's look at some specifics. In Barcelona last year, that was the only complaint was it was too expensive. So we're going to go to Naples. We're going to race in an area. We're going to build a dockage in an area that is an old factory that they have to spend something in the neighborhood of 50 million euros to clean up. All of the places there are in the world, they're worried about money. And I understand that I'm sure the Italian government's going to spend most of that, and they get that cleaned up and taken care of. But right off the bat, they're going to a place where they've got to do major construction before they even hit the door.
Yeah, but that's sort of relatively normal in most America's Cup venues. I mean, and what happens with City Hall is they use the America's Cup hosting as a way of leveraging a whole lot of events out in the planning pipeline to say, right, we've got to go and do that now. And I mean, in Naples, the first thing they're doing, in fact, they're probably starting it this week or last week, is to go and dig out all of these old unexploded World War II bombs out of the harbour so they can then start dredging, so that they can then, make a marina there for the Cup boats to operate out of. I mean, they've known that that problem's there for, since basically the World War II ended. They've done absolutely nothing about it. But what these European venues can do is after COVID, the EU put this fund up that they could go in and use to create these, major works and projects and everything else. It's a one-off use, but I mean, that's what Barcelona tapped into. The guys are going to tap into with the Valencia proposal, and they've done it again with Naples. So they're spending someone else's money to some extent, but they're also getting this project done. And I mean, that's why it happens.
Well, it's a great program for urban redevelopment in Naples. They obviously get an area that isn't probably used very much cleaned up, and that's certainly a good sign. But again, if you're talking about being fiscally responsible and turning around, and again, even if you're using somebody else's money, that's not exactly being fiscally responsible. But that's neither here nor there.
It's the EU and that's the Europeans, and that's the way they operate.
Yeah, no, I get that part. All
I
right,
mean, why not just spend your own?
so some of the cost effectives. Obviously, we're going to go all electric. There's going to be female on the boat, and the crews are going to be sized. They're going to be down to 6. So, any opinions on all electric?
Well, so if you take those one by one, I think it's ridiculous that you've got guys out there working as cyclors or grinders that are just pumping all around a boat. And the first race of the America's Cup's their first yacht race they've ever sailed. So, I can't think of any other sport where you can, run on as a complete novice and, you're doing something that doesn't really contribute to the game, but, you're a necessity. So, I don't have any problems with that. I don't have any problems with super maxis sailing around that are using push button winches that have got, engines running down below to keep the hydraulic power running to, grind the canting keels back and forth. So, there's not really an issue there with that. In terms of the women's quota, I'm a strong believer in meritocracy, but I accept that and I felt that, very much that way with the Volvo when they first brought it down. But when you see it come in, and, sure, you've got women in there that are, pretty big. They're, some of them are ex-rowers. And what that means is they get in there and they get that experience and they've gone around the world once. So once you've run that quota system 2 or 3 times, you've suddenly got these people there that when you're sitting down and doing your crew selection, you've got, males and females on either side, either page. You've got a choice of taking some hairy-ass male that's just on a second ever Volvo, or not even done one before. Or you've got a woman that's done 2 or 3 times around the planet. So why wouldn't you take the female?
In Women in Sailing Strategic Review, which you wrote in 2019, 80% of women and 56% of men saw gender balance as an issue for sailing. 59% of women, 14% of men had an experienced gender-based discrimination, and the numbers kind of go from there. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, a little longer than that, maybe 5 weeks ago, we had a chance to interview Dawn Riley and Linda Bishop, some ladies that were part of an America's Cup challenge here 30 years ago. And kind of the conversation was, it's nice that they're being recognized by SailGP. That shouldn't, but I think we're finally at a point where I don't think adding a female to the boat should be significant information. It should just be part of the way it is.
Well, the thing I've sort of never really understood with the sport is why there aren't, more females in it. I mean, to me, an offshore, I mean, a female is the ideal sort of person to be, a navigator, for instance, which is a, highly skilled job. Generally, they're lighter than males, so you can afford to have them down below. They're a lot more thorough. They're a lot more process orientated. And, the chances of them getting it right are probably more than your typical hairy ass male going down there that, is better off upstairs grinding or whatever. So, there's that side of it. As soon as you get into push button boats, which you do with, electric boats, there's no reason why women can't and shouldn't be there. The other thing with the, again, that I could never understand with America's Cup in particular, when you've got this average crew weight in there, which doesn't matter how many people you have. I mean, the average crew weight was up around about 80 kilos. So if you've got some, big grinder there that you're trying to get onto the crew, that you can't because of the, the weight you've got to hit, surely it's logical to have a woman in there that's, probably going to be around 70 kilos. That gives you another 10 kilos to play with the male. So, but none of them really went down that path. And I think there's too much of it. It's just sort of this closed thinking that some guy that, he might be the eighth or ninth guy onto the crew. But what's he really adding that some top flight women's sailor can't add that's got 2 gold medals hanging around her neck? And, why can't you use her as a tactician? Or why can't you take her on and bring her up to speed? Because, if you had a guy out there like, had two gold medals hanging around his neck, be a no-brainer to get him on the boat. So why aren't these guys doing it? And it seems to me that the only way they can force the issue is by, having a quota. And after the quota's been in for a couple of cycles, the problem will largely solve itself, isn't it? So I think it's just a phase we've got to go through with the sport. It's clearly not happening, of its own accord. And, while I've never been in favour of a quota, I've, accept that they come in, they do work, and they have work. And the other side of me is that I had a second career in the IT recruitment and contracting industry. I mean, and that it was IT supposed to be a, male domain, but in contracting, we had, a lot of women. It was about 50-50.
Yeah.
I never had a client ring me up and say, look, I only want to see males for the spot. I did have the occasional client ring up and say, look, we do want a woman, but the reason we want a female in there is because basically we want to add some balance to the team. Female project managers were just as good or better than males. And I mean, I know one instance I had a project manager that was a client, and I said to her one day, how come these guys just keep lumping more and more projects on you and everything else? I mean, how do you handle it? And she just turned around and said, oh, it's real easy. I came from a family of 14 and I looked after the family. And that's the sort of skills that you'll find that females have got at a managerial level and project management level and a process management level that, a lot of guys just haven't got.
We had some conversation this week with some of the folks inside American Magic and sort of conversations related to whether they're kind of sitting off and watching. I know they've issued a couple of press releases, but I think there's a lot of sit and wait at this point as far as the process. I know that fiscal responsibility is a part of what they've been at least preaching, but that to be able to compete at the level they're talking about, I think money has to be sort of a blank checkbook. And I think that's something that I think everybody's trying to figure out whether that's going to work or not. At the end of the day, they're going to spend as much money in 27 as they did in 24.
Well, I mean, these guys, if they were running an Optimus program, they'd still find a way of spending 100 million to do it. And, they'd be sitting in their tent testing and computer testing and getting optimal shape. And, it's just sort of part of the psyche that's in the club. And, I mean, sure, Team New Zealand have won it without spending the most money of anyone, but they're still right up there at the level you need to spend, and it's always a struggle to raise.
Okay.
I know sometimes we get into it and it's just hard on both of us, but try to understand me more and I'll try to do the same. But you have excuses because you're old. So it's okay.
Listening is a form of love. Find ways to support your kids at sounditouttogether.org.
We want to take a couple of seconds and explain sort of the next section of our conversation with Richard Gladwell, who was so wonderful to have an opportunity to talk to somebody. He's been in the inner workings of the negotiations for the next 2027 America's Cup in Naples. He's been the guy reporting from Auckland and all of that information, and it's been a great honor to be able to have a talk to him. The thing we wanted to talk about, a couple of weeks ago, had a chance to talk to Phoebe Wall-Howard from Substack, and we talked about the state of media in sailing. And we wanted to get a chance with Richard to talk to him about the state of media from his perspective. He's probably the foremost journalist in sail writing around the world, since he covers a lot of the stuff from the equator south, but certainly does a lot of work with the British media. So we want to get a chance to talk to him, and we're going to have that discussion right now. Now, one of the things I really want to talk about, this kind of goes back. We've had some media folks on in the last few weeks talking about the state of media and why it works and why it doesn't. We don't hear anything. We're speculating all over the place. And then all of a sudden, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, America Cup has, I think the group had 2 or 3 press conferences. And all of a sudden, they're giving all kinds of information. As you point out, Ben came down from down there with Grant Dalton. You did some of that interview that was on YouTube. And all of a sudden, we're having these conversations. Are you happy with the way the sailing racing international world treats media?
No. I mean, if you go back into taking the America's Cup as the example, the memorable moments that we've had out of the Cup have usually come out of the media conferences. So, you go back into 87 when, Tommy Blackall lined up Connor and, got him down that, why would you want to build a boat in aluminum if you didn't want to cheat?
Right.
And so you get that out. And I mean, people remember and the general public relate to that too. I mean, it's just gets flashed on the news. People can see what they're saying and, going, oh, what's really going on in here? I mean, they're not sitting there interested in discussing the nuances of someone's giblet shape or, how far they got the cars out and all this carry on. So, when you go back and I mean, Michael Fay was a master at those media conferences where he could just have one in Auckland. You'd get 2 hours notice he was having one. You'd go down there and you just spread the whole thing out. And, the Cup fans might not have liked it because it was all gas-bagging about legals. But, I mean, he could present it in such a way that it did look interesting and, sure it was an air fight between billionaires, but, so what? And then when you get into the events themselves, the biggest issue is getting access to the sailors. So, one of the reasons I didn't go to Barcelona because there was going to be no media conferences there. And when you look back in the, 2013, when they, did have full-blown media conferences after each race, and you had, Dean Barker sitting up there and you had Jimmy Spittle sitting there, and they were firing off each other. It was great. And you got this interaction. I mean, it was real theatre. Yeah. And I know, in Bermuda, they had the same sort of thing where you'd go into a media conference there. It'd be absolutely packed to the gunnels. You could get up there. The media could start hunting as a pack against these guys and asking one a direct question, then flicking to the other and getting a response. And so you got that repartee that was set up. And I mean, it's great comment. Everyone's gone out there and seen what's happening on the water. But you've got suddenly these guys firing off each other as to, what happened, how close they thought it was, what happened in a particular incident and so on and so forth. And then when you come back to New Zealand and people say, oh, it was really good to see those media conferences. It was the only way we could really find out what was going. and what had happened. And it's just all, the Cup's got a huge theatre surrounding it, and it's just sort of it's just a backdrop against which the players, wander on and off stage. Every day in the Cup's different. It's not like the Olympics where you go out there and sure some unusual things go on, but it's pretty much a routine. Cup every day is different, and you've got to bring that out, and you can't do that by some PR person sitting down before the event and deciding what the talking points are going to be for the day.
The very first time we went to a Sail GP event was in Chicago, and they went through the press conference. They marched the guys in. The lady from the back of the room asked the questions. And I assumed when she was done asking her leading questions that we were able to ask a question. So I raised my hand, and I wasn't called on. And I finally stood up. And the question I wanted to ask was a very simple one. It was the first time Sail GP had gone from salt water to fresh water. Had anybody considered the viscosity of that, and just was curious to get an answer?
Mm.
And I was told very specifically that there are we don't ask questions at a press conference. Well, for an old investigative news reporter, I was thrown back a little bit, and I'm a big mouth, so I raised my hand. I said, I'm going to ask it anyway. And Phil Robertson, who was then driving for the Canadians, was nice enough to say, okay, and answered the question. And it was one of those kinds of things. I believe the sport would be farther along. It's not that the people organizing aren't sophisticated, but it's this internal that the world is us against them. And they're not smart enough, at least it seems to me, that we have trust in us to make good judgment, right?
Well, they probably will, but I mean, this issue with the PR people, it's not not being clever. It's a complete immaturity on their part.
Yes.
They and an inexperience that they think they can basically hold the media down by not releasing information. As soon as someone sees that's in the media, knows a bit about sailing, got a bit of a investigative brain cell in their body, they'll suddenly see that and they say, this isn't a roadblock, it's an opportunity.
Right.
And it's an opportunity to basically find out what the story is and find out ahead of your competitive media. So if you can get that out there, away you go. I mean, as far as these guys keep going with that policy, I mean, great. It's holding, mainstream media back because they'll only repeat what they're told and what quotes they can get because they don't know very much about sailing. Most of them have never sailed at all. And they don't really realise what the background story is likely to be or how to go in there and find it out. But when you've got sailing experienced media, I mean, if you go back into the days of Jack Knights and Bob Fisher and Stuart Alexander and Barry Pickthall and Angus Phillips and all those sort of guys there that, the great yachting reporters. I mean, they don't sit there and regurgitate this nonsense that comes out now from a, session they've had pre-race about what are the talking points today.
Dave Reed, who is a very, been around a long time with Sailing World, and if Dave and I had this conversation, he's one of the few left full-time writers in the United States cover sail racing. We miss the guys you just mentioned. There's the personality that those guys brought to the sport made the sport. Do you agree with that?
Oh yeah, of course. But I mean, I don't know when Dave started, but I mean, I started way back, and I sort of really first came up against, the likes of Bob Fisher and that old school in 2000 when the Cup was out here. Oh, sorry, no, I'd seen them in 92 when I was in San Diego with the, working for TVNZ with the graphics. But, they'd always been around. I'd seen them in Auckland and that sort of thing. And it was a real sort of group they had going together. And then, going back into 87, I mean, there's an organisation within the sailing, inner sanctum of sailing journalism called SINS, which is Society of International Nautical Scribes. So,
Yep.
For my sins, I got put into that in Fremantle, even though I wasn't actually there. I mean, I was working with Alan Seft and Larry Keating and guys that were there that were covering it. So they were looking for people to add in. So I went into that. But that's a real sort of, tight old school group. And they've all sailed. They know the sport backwards. They've got good contacts. There's nothing really new that's going to come out in the sport that they haven't seen in some context before and can then turn around and relate. And, they all had, differing backgrounds. Some were in sailing, some were in design, some had been sailmakers, some had been, reporters that also sailed.
Do we have what's the word question I want to ask? Is our view of sailing bigger than what the outside world thinks? We're a niche sport. We don't sometimes act like a niche sport. Is that part of the problem?
I think that depends on where you live.
Okay. Well, that's a good point.
You live in the States, or as I saw in England when I was there last month, there was no reporting there of Sail GP. There was no reporting there of the Admiral's Cup in the mainstream media. So, whereas in New Zealand, Sail GP gets coverage every weekend that it's on. It probably gets a couple of stories in between that. And certainly if anything happens that's slightly significant with Sail GP, it gets covered. This announcement they had on Monday, I mean, that was it was leading the news headlines in New Zealand on one channel, and it got big exposure on the other. So, that's the sort of the place it gets into. America's Cups, I think it's lost its way, largely because of what has happened in the last two cups with the value going offshore. And some people like that and some don't. And the ones that don't sort of, they'll watch it, but, they're not that keen. But Sail GP is really making an inroads into that. We don't know really what that's going to be, in the final, come the end of 2027, when, there's likely to be 16 teams in Sail GP and sailing across about 17 venues, or you've got a cup there that's been sailed in Naples. It's had the Youth Cup, the Women's Cup, and it's had, the full-blown America's Cup. But of course, even now, 2 years out from that event, we don't know who the entries are likely to be. In fact, it's not even 2 years. It's about 18 months out from the start of the event. Mm. And, the other thing, just as an aside on that, I mean, the reason they're having to go out and use these recycled boats is because no one's got the time to really go through a full design program if you're a new entry and build a boat. So they're having to get onto recycled ones. And, for all the stuff that's talked about it, that's the reason why.
I think foiling's helped or hurt the America's Cup. And my second part of that same question would be, would the 52s be a really good monohull replacement for the America's Cup Championship?
Oh, I don't think foiling's really hurt the Cup at all. I mean, it's kept it, it was always about being on the bleeding edge of technology, and that's, where it's sat. I mean, they were sailing boats way back in the 30s that, dissolved after the racing, for God's sake. I mean, it's there's not a problem there with, single-use boats and so on and so forth, because it's always the way the Cup's been. Foiling has done a huge change into the sport. I mean, at the Olympic level, I think now 4 out of the 10 events are foiling, and if the changes go through that look like they're coming through, that'll be an even greater number. So it has changed the sport. You see a lot more people out foiling, on boards now than wherever there before. It's part of mainstream sport. Whereas, you go back and the TP52s sound great. They look good on the Super Series. but it's not going to pull the punters. Joe Public's not going to like it. They look like they're very slow boats going upwind. Sure, there's a lot of technical nuances and rules nuances and that sort of thing going on there. But, I think when you've got a sport that's really heavily evolved around tactics and rules, it will attract the aficionados that, know those and understand them and know how the various plays work. But and it's to some extent it's up to the commentators to bring that through. But Peter Montgomery's always had this saying about you've got to be able to explain the sport in ways that the little old lady with the blue rinse hairdo in Riverton, which is down on the west coast of New Zealand, can understand. And I mean, he was one of the rare people in the world that could do that, and that's what transformed the sport on a lot of levels. But these guys that are there now are no Pete Montgomerys, and until the sport finds another one of him or her, we're always going to struggle.
Yeah. Last question. We were in Saint-Tropez for one of the SailGP events, and I mentioned that it would be nice to see an American on the American boat. This is before it was bought. And I said, I really believe, and I said this to a couple people, I said, I really believe that there's got to be some voices that sound like mine on my boat and voices that sound like you're on your boat and so on and so forth. But here's the question. New Zealand has been so successful over the last decade, certainly the last 5 years. Why have you guys as a country been so successful? And is it as popular or more popular than rugby?
Oh, certainly not more popular than rugby.
Okay. Okay. What makes you guys so fast?
Well, the thing with rugby is that it's basically a sport that now rewards a lot of, particularly at a junior and school age level. If you've got a big kid in there and he wants to play rugby, he'll probably do pretty well because he just charges at the little guys and knocks them over and, other stuff like that.
Like every other sport. No, I get it.
So what happens with sailing is that New Zealand is not consistently good in sailing. What happens is that we have talent that comes through in waves. So, and the key to it is recognizing where that junior talent is, where it's sitting, and when the wave's about to be coming in. So it's like surfing. If you're sitting in there and you're watching a set of rollers come in, there's going to be a set of 6 come in, and there's going to be a flat spot. So what happens in New Zealand sailing, you've always had a bunch of young guys that have been given a chance early on. Happened with KZ7. Well, those guys there were all in their sort of, I was 33, 34 when that was being put together. The guys that were in there were about 8 to 10 years younger than me. Some were only 21. And, they all got given a chance. And then, of course, what happens is once they given the chance, exactly the same situation you've got with women's sailing. You give someone the chance, they get them in there, they get the experience. Suddenly people realize that they're good and they just stay with the game. And that's really what happens in New Zealand. So there's the wave that came through in 87. They went out and stayed there through to 95, joined up by, Coots came out. He was sort of, the junior end of it in 87 and was sort of sitting around in the boat park for most of it in 92. Suddenly in 95, he's steering the boat. He brings a whole bunch of his mates in, like Murray Jones and Brad Butterworth and those sort of guys. They click. And then they go through and eventually join the senior tour. And there's another wave that comes in, like Peter Burling, who came in, in 2014. And again, got given the chance and stayed with it. And you've got to just recognise this talent development is quite important. But the thing you've got to realise with talent development is that actually it happens of its own accord. It's going to work. And there's no way you can get a whole group of kids out there and coach them to be America's Cup sailors. The interesting thing in the New Zealand side of it, which is there's about 120 yacht clubs in New Zealand. 60 of those are in Auckland. So what that means is that in the other centres, those centres have one yacht club each. And what happens there is that, and the other thing that's really interesting with the America's Cup guys is that most of them come out originally out of these country yacht clubs. So they've gone in there, they live in, like Peter Burling's case, he lived in Tauranga. There's only one yacht club really in Tauranga. He sailed at that, got all the opportunities to sail against adults and everything else, and trailer sailors and whatever else he was sailing on that weekend or was going or looking for crew. And then he started making his moves. And the other thing that big mistake is that people stay in their age group. So you've always got this thing where, you get some kid that gets good and optimist, but he doesn't have to move out till he's 15 because that's what the age limit is. Whereas the smart guys have basically gone on to they're in 29ers by that stage, or they're maybe in something bigger, plus they're maybe doing a bit of keelboat sailing and everything else. So you've got to get that, mix of experience there. You've got to be sailing at least 2 classes, and it just moves on from there. From the women's point of view, what they've got to do is they've got to go into open fleet competition as soon as they can, and as soon as they've got a boat that's, they're physically the right size for and can compete against men. And once you can do that, you're going to learn a lot more than you are sitting in there in either age group sailing or gender split sailing. And but the point comes back that all these top guys in New Zealand have all started in country clubs. Very, very few of them, if any, have come out of that group of 60 Auckland yacht clubs. Sure, they've all moved to Auckland, to go and get experience in the big fleets because that's what happens here. But it's not where they started. And, if they'd been in Auckland, right from when they were born, they probably wouldn't be in sailing.
I'll finish with a very interesting story, and we have been talking about the press and being honest with folks and the rest of it. My first event the summer we started the show, which is now 6 years ago, was the Sail GP in Chicago. We stayed on the Navy Pier. We stayed at the hotel on the Navy Pier. And the third floor was the GP Sail media room. So as an old reporter, I would always show up at the press room early because sometimes you just get a chance to talk to your friends. So in this particular case, I go up after the race that day. There's a few people mingling and talking, and I start talking to this gentleman. This very nice conversation for 20 minutes. And I found out his name is Russell. I have no idea who he is because, again, I'm brand new to this sport. So he says, I got to go up to the bathroom. And I asked Sarah Renz, who was the media professional there in Chicago, and I said, who is this Russell guy? She goes, that's Russell Coots. And I said, who is Russell Coots? She says, get out your phone. So I got my phone out, and I looked, and I realized that I was talking to royalty. So when the guy I'd been talking to was named Russell, when he came back, I started to call him for a couple seconds Mr. Coots, and he immediately stopped me to tell me that his name was Russell. He gave me his phone number, and he couldn't have been nicer, and he couldn't have been cooler. And I sat and talked for 45 minutes. He says it's the first conversation he's had in a while where he actually had the chance to talk to somebody without any pretense or process, because I didn't know enough. And when I'd ask a question, didn't know the answer, I didn't pretend like I was a professional. To this day, I still have his phone number. I've called him a couple of times. He couldn't be nicer. And if he's like every other person I've met from New Zealand, including yourself, I want to move there. But being said, I can't tell you how much I've appreciated the time we've spent. And we're going to keep in contact with you as this thing goes forward to 27. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity. It's really, good to be on shows like this, and it broadens your perspective. And I think everyone's, they all tend to sort of live in, their own bubble, and, I'm as guilty as anyone of that. And you sort of suddenly wake up one day and realize that you've had your head stuck up your own backside for too long. There's something going on out here that you haven't realized. And that's really what the great part of the online side of the sport is now. I mean, you can just sit there and you can turn on YouTube and you can just thunk and cover a whole lot of areas of sport. Some you're interested in, some you're not. But, it's quite often it's the some you're not that's where you really learn. And the other big thing about it now is that you can see a lot of the historical stuff that's up there. So, you're getting exposed to history and seeing, sides of the sport that, happened many, many years ago. But a lot of the problems they faced in that era
Right.
are the same ones that are being faced now. And what are their solutions? And, you look at that and you suddenly realize how things hang together and work, and, just put the modern context on it, and you've probably got a pretty good answer.
For
And it
sure.
may not be the ones that, everyone's thinking about currently.
Up next is all the highlights from the D Cup at Bayview Yacht Club, and we had a chance to talk to a number of folks involved in that. Some pretty good action, so we'll bring that to you in a couple of seconds.
I'm Naheem Hines. I support the Muscular Dystrophy Association because they help my mom and kids like Ethan.
Thanks to the Muscular Dystrophy Association and people like you, I have more hope than ever before.
Join us and learn more at mda.org today.
Every day, thousands of kids start vaping. And I can't let this happen to my kid. Of course, it's awkward to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping. Hey, bestie, how sketch is vaping? It's hard to get their attention. Ready? Go. Yes. Look at that. You didn't even turn yours over. So if you want to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping, you got to get it trending.
No, you're doing it wrong.
Let's go.
Can we talk?
Yeah, what's up?
Visit talkaboutvaping.org for tips on when and how to have the vape talk.
When you're announcing from the banister for a couple hundred people?
Well, a couple things. Know who your audience is and what their bandwidth is on knowledge of the rules and the intricacies of this game. It is complicated. So I'm gauging what level to talk about. Don't be too general. We do have a lot of jargon in this sport, as you know. But at the same time, make it entertaining and understandable. Match racing in particular has many rules that they wouldn't know.
One of the great complaints last summer was both Jerry Jobson at Marseille and the guys for ESPN doing the America's Cup was just a little too complicated for an audience that basically tuned out after the second or third day. Ratings fell because you're talking rocket science to a bunch of people just looking at boats.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to make too many comments about America's Cup. That's a different thing.
No, I get that. I'm just saying you have to know your audience is your point.
Correct. But at the same time, at that level, for sure, it's a technical game. And the technology has always been part of America's Cup. The team that masters the technology in that arena generally has an edge. And so you'd be remiss not to mention that, in my opinion. This is different. These boats are the same. They swap boats. They take the equipment out of the equation. So then it becomes the teams and their ability, and as we've seen today so far, Ryan Seago and his team, this is their club, their venue, they know these boats, they've spent more time in these boats. So their mastery of the maneuvers, of the timing, is really showing here.
Dave Perry said that this is real racing. If you really want to learn to race as you're coming up, match racing where you get your back on.
Absolutely. It pushes everything. It pushes your knowledge of the rules, it pushes your knowledge of boat speed, boat handling. Every bit of the game is pushed in match racing.
Welcome back. We're talking to one of the best match race sailors in the Midwest. We're talking to Christian Prendergast, Chicago Yacht Club young man who just had some pretty good success here in Detroit, runner-up in the D Cup to Ryan Seabago, and you won the overall. You're the 44th ranked match racer in the country, and you guys had a fun race this weekend. So talk a little bit about this week, and it qualifies you for the Congressional Cup, and kind of give us a hint as to exactly what that is.
Well, going into Detroit last week, we knew that we had to make the semis in order to win the Grand Slam. And so a lot of our effort was just focused on doing that. And once we made the semis, we knew we had nothing to lose, so we just wanted to race as hard as we can. Unfortunately, we had a couple collisions, and I've lost a bit of money from that. But it was all good fun, and the prize money covers that. So
You guys race different boats at different venues, right?
correct.
So it's not always the same stuff. But what is it you like about match racing? And let me point out that Dave Perry said if you want to learn to be a great sailor, match racing is where it probably is a good place to start.
Well, match racing is still pretty new to me. I've had the privilege of sailing with really good tacticians, namely Sam Gilmore, and then with this recent event, we had Chris Poole. So I've been learning a lot. It's only been I think 14 months since I started match racing, and maybe 10 events. So it's still quite new, and there's still lots to learn, but I'm happy with the progress that we're making as a team.
Mentioned Chris Poole. He was number one in the world last year, won the overall. You got him. That's not a bad guy to have in your boat. It's a little bit like having Tiger Woods on your scramble team for a golf event.
Yeah, it's good to have. It's good to be surrounded by people that know what they're doing.
For those who don't know, it's almost a little bit like bumper cars. I mean, it's very close proximity, as you pointed out. I think you guys snapped off a prod, not some kind of something, and then you're the one that's got to pay the freight on the boats when they don't work out. Am I right?
Yeah, we had a collision earlier in that race, and we heard a little crunch. We assumed it was just some fiberglass, and then we set the kite and then jibed, and our pole was in the air. So it wasn't ideal, but
Specifically you guys did not get to the 3 points. You got to, I think, 2.5, and there was a 3:00 start. Just kind of explain what that was, so the guys were there, or people watching understand what went on.
So originally the series was meant to be first to 3 points. So normally that's 3 wins. But both Ryan and I had damage points because we both caused collisions and ended up, breaking the boats to a certain extent. So we ended up with a minus point, and he ended up with a minus 0.75 points. So we both were fighting. We both had to win more races than we had already won. So in essence, we just ran out of time to race, and he ended with a quarter point more than us. And we wish we could have done another race, but that's what's in the SIs.
This was the conclusion of this year's series. So
Correct.
The culmination is obviously the Congressional Cup. Where is that challenged, and when will all that happen?
I believe the Con Cup starts April 29th or 28th, and it goes to May 3rd. It'll be in Long Beach, California, in the Catalinas. So the big, slow boats. So we'll have lots of time to think about what we're doing.
How much time do you get now between now and this next April when you're at the University of Illinois? How much time do you get in the boat?
I'm going to have 0 time in the boat.
Okay. So,
yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. Well, listen, any thoughts on the Detroit venue? You guys had a chance to play. Is it different being in a river than it might be other places?
It's for sure unique. With the boats as well and the current, it's kind of, I personally think it's more like team race style, where it's very fast paced, and you're you're not always sure what's going to happen with all the shifts. And you can kind of get yourself out of jail because of how small the boats are. So it's a little bit different to the other boats we had in the series, but you have to be able to do it, and it's good fun.
Does the second place finish move you up from 44th at all in the rankings?
Yeah, we'll find out in September, but it'll for sure help.
You're in the top 40, 45 for the world, and you've only been doing it 14 months. You obviously must be a heck of a sailor.
Yeah, I mean, can't do it alone. So
No, I
it's me
get
and the crew.
and having great help in the boat certainly is part of that. Listen, I
Yeah.
wanted to really appreciate you spending a couple minutes with us. We just wanted to congratulate you, and we'll hopefully catch up with you next year at in the Con Cup, and have a great winter.
Thank you.
Wanted to thank all the folks at Bayview Yacht Club for helping us out check out the D Cup a couple of weeks ago. And Bayview puts that on every year, and this was the last stop. I think it was an exciting event, and hopefully you enjoyed seeing some of the action. I also wanted to take a couple seconds to thank Richard Gladwell for such a wealth of knowledge and such a cool interview. It certainly made this year with all the other folks we've had on, and I want to thank him. And we'll be back in about a week with some of the latest parts of the last part of the sailing season here in the Great Lakes. And so for all the guys in back, thanks for watching.